It began on a night like any other, in a sleepy town nestled deep within the forest. I had always found solace in the quiet of these woods, but on this particular evening, an eerie fog descended, casting an ominous pall over everything it touched. As I ventured out to investigate, I noticed the fog was unlike any I had ever encountered. It clung to my skin with a bone-chilling coldness, seeping into my pores like a malevolent presence. A sense of foreboding washed over me, a gut feeling that something was terribly wrong. With each step I took, the atmosphere grew thicker, almost suffocating. The air was laden with a putrid stench, a mixture of decay and despair that seemed to permeate my very being. My heart quickened, and I could feel the tendrils of fear curling around my mind. As the fog thickened, I could barely see more than a few feet ahead. Shapes moved within it, distorted and grotesque, like nightmarish phantasms. My breaths came in ragged gasps, and a sense of disorientation washed over me. I knew I needed to find shelter, but the fog had already swallowed my sense of direction. The nightmare began when I stumbled upon a figure, a grotesque caricature of a childhood fear. It was a clown, its face painted in garish colors, its eyes hollow voids of malice. It grinned at me with a manic glee, revealing rows of sharp, blood-stained teeth. My pulse raced, and a cold sweat broke out across my brow. The clown lunged, its outstretched fingers reaching for me. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. The stench of decay was overpowering now, mingling with the coppery tang of blood. I could feel its hot breath on my neck, its laughter echoing in my ears. With sheer terror propelling me, I ran blindly through the fog, each step taking me deeper into a nightmare. The fog seemed to feed on my fear, conjuring grotesque creatures from the depths of my subconscious. Faces of loved ones contorted into masks of agony, their voices twisted into mournful cries that pierced my soul. I stumbled upon a dense thicket, a grotesque tableau of horrors. Twisted, deformed figures writhed in agony, their flesh contorted and mangled. The stench of burning flesh filled the air, and I could hear their pained wails, a chorus of suffering that clawed at my sanity. As I tried to escape the nightmarish scene, the fog seemed to close in around me, its tendrils wrapping around my limbs like a suffocating shroud. It whispered cruel secrets in my ear, each word a dagger that pierced my mind. The sense of hopelessness was suffocating, and I felt as though I were drowning in a sea of despair. I couldn't see where I was going, and the fog seemed to distort time itself. Hours passed, maybe even days. I couldn't be sure. My mind was a maelstrom of horrors, each worse than the last. I could hear the screams of the damned, the cries of those who had succumbed to the fog's malevolent embrace. Then, I encountered something that chilled me to the bone. It was a mirror, standing alone amidst the fog. My reflection was distorted, my features contorted into a grotesque mask of despair. But it was the figures that lurked behind me that filled me with a terror beyond words. They were the twisted, nightmarish versions of myself, my deepest fears and insecurities given form. They reached out with bony fingers, their eyes filled with malevolence. I couldn't tear my gaze away from the mirror, the figures drawing closer with each passing moment. I could feel their icy touch on my skin, their whispers in my ear. They reveled in my terror, feeding on it like a perverse feast. I was trapped in a never-ending loop of my own worst nightmares, each one more horrifying than the last. The fog seemed to tighten its grip on me, and I could feel it seeping into my mind, distorting my thoughts. I knew that if I didn't escape soon, I would become one of the wretched souls trapped within its malevolent embrace. With every ounce of willpower I could muster, I tore myself away from the mirror and stumbled blindly through the fog. The air was thick with the stench of death and despair, and the nightmarish figures that lurked within it seemed to close in around me. I don't know how I managed to escape the nightmare fog, but suddenly it lifted, dissipating like a dark dream. I found myself standing on the edge of the forest, gasping for breath, my clothes soaked with sweat. The fog was gone, and with it the horrors it had brought to life. I was left standing alone in the silence, shaken to my core by the ordeal I had just endured. To this day, I can't forget the feeling of the nightmare fog, the suffocating darkness that consumed me, and the horrors it conjured from the deepest recesses of my mind. It was a reminder that our worst fears are always lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to claw their way to the surface and haunt our every waking moment.